Om Vasudeva Sutam Devam Kamsachanuramardanam Devaki Paramanandam Krishnam Vande Jagatgurum. So it's after a very long time that we are discussing Bhagavad Gita. In fact, we had completed chapter 10, which is known as Vibhuti Yoga, the glory of the Lord. So the last two verses, I'll just recapitulate because we ended the chapter there, but because there was a long gap, for some reason we could not take the classes. We began last Saturday by having our alternate class on Vedanta as the science of human possibilities. So the alternate Saturday class, which used to be Bhagavad Gita, which used to be conducted by our university in Kolkata. So they used to do it, but now we are doing it using our Zoom link. So there used to be a different Zoom link. So I think some people are missing out because, especially those who are in India, they will be missing out this talk because they have not yet. I mean, I would like to inform them that you can share this Zoom link, which can be later on uploaded on their website. But right now we will continue, and I'll just try to recapitulate the last two verses, which are the concluding two verses. Why do we ever discuss the glory of the Lord? Now, in every tradition, the idea of God keeps on emphasizing one thing, that there is so much of glory associated with the Lord, and it is through His grace the concept of God may change. One may say the God is impersonal or formless. Some may say He has a form. Some may say He is the all-pervading existence which penetrates the whole creation. He is in and through the creation. We have to understand Him, whatever be the concept. And as I pointed out, the concepts also change, as Bhagavad Gita clearly shows. There may be one way of interpretation of Bhagavad Gita according to the dualistic school, where they believe, where they accept or they insist on Krishna as the Supreme Lord to the exclusion of everything else. But according to the real Vedantic tradition, and according to Bhagavad Gita itself, there are several verses which can prove this point, that the Lord or the concept of the Lord changes according to the mind of the worshipper. You like to see God in a particular form. That doesn't mean that some other form is not suitable. There may be some other form. There cannot be, one cannot be dogmatic about a particular way of worship or a particular form. So Krishna himself says, when somebody says, a follower of Krishna, that I worship Krishna, what does he mean? What is the Krishna that he is referring to? Definitely refers to a supreme being, because human beings, the religious quest itself began with the idea that I have limitations and I need help to navigate my way in this world. I take the help of friends, I take the help of powerful people, but still at some stage we feel that even they are powerless to satisfy all my requirements, physical, mental, and other requirements, and the spiritual, the inner quest, which everybody feels at some stage of his life, that lack of fulfillment. So they want something higher, something which is not tangible right now, but they know there is something higher that they are yearning. They are not satisfied with the mere material things and the things of the world as most of the common people do. So they turn to religion, or they turn to the prophets, they turn to organized religion, where they get certain ideas based on the scriptural tradition or based on the lives and teachings of the prophets or the saints or the spiritual practitioners whom they have faith in. And when they do it, they would definitely consider that person whom they are idolizing as someone who is greater than us. I would definitely seek help, or I would definitely seek the support of somebody who is far, far superior to me. So that's how religion, it began. The ancient primitive people, they saw the forces of nature which were destroying them. At an instant, a storm would come and blow them off. So they thought, perhaps if we appease the storm god or the rain god or the sun, so many natural forces of which human beings were terrified. They were terrified of these things because they knew that these things are far beyond our control. So who is the controller? So primitive religious ideas began with worshipping these forces of nature. So every religion or every concept of God implies that you seek something which is supernatural in that deity or in that God whom you believe. Whatever be his nature, whatever be his name, whatever be his or her form. So that is what is mentioned in these last two verses. What is the essence of these vibhutis? Vibhuti means the glories. So far till verse 1, from verse 1 to 40, there was a description of the different aspects of the Supreme. As Bhagavad Gita describes, they are the different aspects, but Sri Krishna gives a warning. He says they are not complete. They're just a sample of all the possible glories that can be used to describe the Supreme. Because you cannot describe, if you consider someone to be a Supreme Being, then definitely you cannot say his glories are limited. Then he'll be one like one of us. But still he says, as far as the human mind can go, I'm trying to describe in a few words or a few verses. Of course, he uses more than 40 verses to describe the vibhuti. But at the end he says, what do you do? These glories are fine, but what is it? In what way will it help you? That is what is mentioned in Yad Yad Vibhuti Mat Sattvam Srimad Urjitam Mevava Tat Tad Eva Avagachatvam Mama Tejo Ansha Sambhavam. Tejo Ansha Sambhavam means whatever you see around you in nature, which exhibits some glory, may not be the full glory, but whatever is exhibiting some kind of glory, prosperous or powerful, or know that it has sprung from a spark of my splendor. My means here is not referring to Krishna the person, but that Supreme Being, who for Vaishnavas or for those who follow the Bhagavad Gita is Krishna himself. So if in other traditions, some may call him Allah or some Father in heaven, or some may call that force as Shakti or Mother, the feminine power, which Prakriti is. In India, of course, we believe, or everybody believes, that the manifestations of God which shows itself as creation has to be feminine, because it's only the feminine aspect of nature which gives rise, which creates further worlds, which creates beings. So there is this tendency in Indian philosophy to consider creation as feminine. Though there is no gender, when you come to the Supreme, he is neither male nor female. It's a formless reality. But for the simple understanding of human mind, The whole essence of Bhagavad Gita, as explained in the Sankhya Yoga of the Bhagavad Gita, is Sankhya posits two realities, which is known as dualism. One is the pure consciousness, and the other is the inert nature. Nature is considered to be inert, and it's the consciousness that is the prime mover. So reality, whatever we see around us, it's known as Prakriti or nature, is by itself, it cannot create. It requires the proximity of the Purusha or the consciousness, which gives it the power to, which the power to create is exhibited through Prakriti. It is because of the proximity of the Purusha. So the goal of life is to consider these great manifestations, whether you call it the feminine power as Shakti, or you can call it a power of the Lord Himself, if we believe in a particular form of the Lord. And He has these glories, whether it's personal or impersonal, He has these glories. But the glories that are described in this chapter, 10th chapter, Sri Krishna warns us that this is not the whole thing. I'm just giving you something to meditate upon. Even if you meditate on a few of these glories, it will ultimately lead you to the supreme reality. That is the purpose. That is the essence of this Vibhuti. So, verse number 41 first warns a person that don't think the glories of the Lord are the Lord Himself. That is one mistake we should not make. These are just a few samples which He has described of His glories. The different powerful things that we see around in nature. They may be prosperous, they may be powerful. However powerful they are just, is warning people that it's just part of the entire real glory of the Supreme Being. So it has sprung out from a spark of my splendor, just to give them a concept of infinity. So the example is given, the sun's rays are spread everywhere and reveals things in the true perspective. But the revealing light actually is in the sun. It's not in the rays. The rays may be part of that sun, and they are enough for us to illuminate certain objects, show us things in the proper perspective. But we can't say this is the supreme, because the sun is the source. So also, the consciousness that percolates through nature, we see it in different ways. In some cases, we don't see it perfectly. In some cases, we see that consciousness shining behind that, and shining not in the physical sense, from the point of view of knowing. Consciousness means to know, to experience. So the pure consciousness reveals itself in smaller consciousness because of Prakriti. Imperfect consciousness, we see so many manifestations of the sun's light, heat, sound, heat, light, and the different properties that the rays exhibit when they fall upon certain objects. If it is a opaque object, they are just absorbed. If it's a transparent object, light passes through them, and we know this is a transparent object. If it falls on a black rock, the light simply disappears because there is no opacity. So it's this glory of the sun reflects itself differently in different objects. So that is why I say the revealing light appears to be imperfect. The consciousness is imperfect. As I often quote this Sufi mystic who saw consciousness everywhere. That is a realization which whether it is an Advaitin, Dvaitin, when we realize, the realization of any person is to become one with that supreme consciousness, whatever the religion you may follow, which is also known as the spirit in Christianity. So the spirit is everything for which Jesus lived and died for. He says, my kingdom, the kingdom of God is the kingdom of the spirit, not the kingdom of this world. So according to him, the spirit and mammon, God and mammon cannot go together, because this is reflected light. That is the real light, the light I am the light of the soul, as he says. Who is that I? That supreme being. So different prophets, different religious ideologies explain it in different way. But everybody accepts that whatever glory that you see, whatever splendor that you see, whatever beauty that we appreciate, they are all these divine attributes of the Supreme. They are not the Supreme themselves. They are just a reflection of the infinite light of the sun in different objects. But why do we have to consider that? Why Sri Krishna is explaining all these things in the 40 verses that preceded these two? Because he thinks that our limited imagination, which is obviously inspired by these wonderful glories of the Lord, they will send us even the least of glories that we see. We'll come to a wonderful verse which Robert Oppenheimer was the mastermind behind the atomic bomb. So he quoted a verse from the Bhagavad Gita. I don't know whether he just came across or was he a student. But when he saw the whole explosion, he seems to have quoted this verse, which will come in the next chapter, Vishwarupa Darshana, where Arjuna actually experiences these glories with a special grace of the Lord. So when the first atomic blast, when they experimented it, he says, I remember the verse from the Gita which says, that light which appears as if it is the light of 1,000,000 suns, that light which in resemblance is like the light of 1,000,000 suns. It was so blinding. When the first explosion, they tried to observe it, of course, using some kind of safety glass, otherwise their eye would have. But even from a distance, he says, I remember this verse of the Gita. So these are the great powers of nature that we have exploited or maybe tried to recreate. So all this glory, this brilliance, this splendor, and all the other beautiful things in the world are different expressions of the same Lord. But its importance, according to Krishna, is because it grasps our attention, and we go into raptures when we see all these wonderful sights. Then we can use these phenomena to think of the glory of the Supreme, from whom these attributes have come. If the sun is so glorious, then you imagine, if somebody tells you that the glory of the Supreme is like 100 million moons and suns. So the glory of God, these are pointers according to him. These are just pointers. One need not just be happy with these. One has to go forward. So Sri Ramakrishna, in his own rustic way in the gospel, he explains this with a beautiful quote. He says, do you know what is meant by Brahman with divine attributes? The idea in Vedanta is, there is a Brahman, or which is pure consciousness, which has no attributes. But that same Brahman, when it is seen through the lens of creation, it creates different divine attributes. So he says it's like a vast expanse of water with waves, ripples. He says, just imagine that huge lake. It's vast. I mean, it's a huge body of water. Perhaps you can't see the end of it. And in that there are waves, ripples, billows, bubbles, sprays, froth, and other things. When the sea, when you stand near the shore, you see a vast expanse of water, but you see these different forms. He says, similarly, in the Chitakasha, the space, the expanse of consciousness can be experienced as little bits of consciousness. That Chitakasha means the mental space. where you conceive of this great creation. That there has to be a mental space. When you close your eyes, when you contemplate on creation, you have an idea, you get an idea of what consciousness is all about. So it can be experienced in these little things, just as in a very big ocean, you experience these waves. That wave may be huge, it may be a tidal wave, and we may be overwhelmed. But compared to the ocean, whole ocean, taken as on the whole, this is nothing. This is just a minor thing. But for a person, these attributes help him to imagine that if the wave is so big and so overwhelming, then what about the ocean? So that's the idea. So he similarly says in the consciousness, even incarnations, the so-called incarnations, the so-called prophets, they are but little bubbles. The Supreme is far beyond them. But because they are powerful, because they serve our purpose, we worship them, we respect them. So when Krishna says, he is being very humble when he says, the Supreme Being, which has manifested as this, some of the glories I'll show you. That is because he had that ability to show Arjuna, but don't be overwhelmed by that. They are all limited compared to the infinite ocean or the infinite consciousness. In the Chidakasha means, the Akasha means space. So it's a difficult concept to understand. Chit Akasha, Chit means consciousness. So what do you mean the space occupied by consciousness? See, space, when somebody says space, we just mean that it is some kind of area or some kind of volume that is, oh, this is space, this is my space, that is your space. But when you talk of freedom, then you talk of mental space. It says, give me some mental space. There's no fixed volume as such. Some physical space you understand. Oh, this is my room. Give me my private space. I'll stay in this room. But when you talk of consciousness, when your consciousness is impinged by other people around you, you just burst out. You said, just give me some mental space. Let me be with my own mental space. So that is what Chidakasha. So even big incarnations, they are also parts of that supreme consciousness. Consciousness is infinite. That is known as Brahman, Prajnanam Brahma. That is the Vedantic concept, that the whole existence is consciousness. But bits of the consciousness are caught up in limited. If it is caught up in a very small body, it is a jiva like us. But if that consciousness is caught up in big personalities like prophets, who come with so much of force, so much of overwhelming influence they have on a vast majority of mankind, they also have that same consciousness behind them, but the power of manifestation is different. So the vast, here Sri Krishna is warning that no matter how glorious the Vibhuti is, he is warning Arjuna, but know that it is not complete. But it is good for you. Incarnations are good for you, this powerful personal, because they are pointers to the infinite ocean of consciousness. The idea of the huge capacity of the wave to emanate from the ocean and just overwhelm you, that itself will give you a sense of glory. That is why when we talk of these glories, every religion will talk of the wonderful glories of, if you go to Islam, they say there are 1,000 attributes of Allah. There are so many, there are innumerable. And in fact, the Jewish religion also, they say the Supreme is so great that you can't even name it. To name that Supreme, though they use some words like Jehovah and other things, Yahweh, there's so many, but it is considered to be a kind of sacrilege if you try to name the Lord. Even naming is a limitation. But as Vedanta says, even with these limitations, these limitations have a use, a limited name, limited form, limited power. Even they have some use because they are pointers to the infinite. If the Lord If the manifestation of the Lord, whether it's an incarnation prophet or a saint, is so great, then what about the Supreme Himself? So they are like different doorways. You want to go into the space outside, and you are inside. You are inside a house. There are some small doors, some big doors. These are like doorways to that infinite space. You have not gone out. You need some door to go out to experience that. So these incarnations, it's a crude example, but you may consider these vibhutis, these glories, as different avenues or different openings through which you can peep into the vast space outside. It's just an example. So you have that idea always in Vedanta that no matter what we discuss, no matter the wonderful glories of the Lord which we enumerate in our scriptures, they are far, 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 the real nature of the Lord is far, far, far behind, far, far beyond our imagination. So that is one verse you have to remember. So before he concludes with the 42nd verse, there is a tendency with especially people who are mathematical in nature, though there is a concept of infinite in nature, but still people think that if you say make a list of 25 glories of the Lord, then what is God? He is the sum total of all this. Just to prevent that idea, because you can't exhaust the glories of the Lord. Just to say that there is, mathematics of course have this concept of infinity, which is no doubt very difficult to understand, but still it is there. So what is not finite is infinite. That's the maximum we can say about this Lord. So he ends this description of the glories so that Arjuna should not mistake, like other people, that Sri Krishna has described these 40 glories. Nothing can be beyond that. As I told you, there are thousands of glories to describe the great Lord according to different religions, but they are not exhaustive. There are many glories which cannot be listed, and people should not feel that these are the glories. Okay, sum total is God. So Lord clarifies that He is not the same as the manifested universe. Glories are all in the manifested universe. They may be glories of Prakriti, the nature. Nature will show so many glories. Some of them are perceivable, some of them are even not perceivable by human beings, by the naked eye. See these galaxies and just let your imagination loose and see how much of glory is there in the Lord. In not Lord, just this universe. If you just sit with that astronomical telescope and just try to find out, and then even our own Milky Way, the galaxy in which we live, is so vast. The distances are so huge and vast that you can't even imagine the expanse or the extent to which the glory of the Lord is manifested. So he clarifies, he says, I have described only a few things which are possible for you to understand, and don't think it is the sum total of these will give you an idea of no matter how many glories I list, don't make that mistake of adding everything, summing up and coming to a conclusion. So athava bahune taina kim jnanena tavarjuna vistamya aham idam krutsnam ekanshena sthito jagat. So he says, this is a very important verse. Arjuna is not asking this question, but Sri Krishna is imagining or anticipating that Arjuna will ask this question. He said, if the glory is beyond what you described, then why have you wasted my time? So he is anticipating Arjuna's doubt and says, but what need is there, O Arjuna, for this detailed knowledge which I have given you? He says, I stand supporting the whole universe. I means here is referring to the Brahman, the whole universe with a single fragment of myself. So the support is something, the whole idea behind, or the whole support of this universe. That is why a religion in Hinduism, in uh, Eastern spirituality, is known as dharma, that which holds. Just to give an idea, the thing that holds should be, of course, stronger than the thing that it is holding, otherwise it will collapse. So if you extend your imagination, you'll find that no matter how big a thing is, there is something which is supporting. So he's saying, I stand supporting the whole universe, I means this Brahman, with a single fragment of myself. So, with all the limitations which Prakriti has imposed upon that Supreme Spirit, the Supreme is showing only a few skills or a few powers, which of course to the human mind are great and huge and enormous, and then he may think that this is divinity. So it's like the example is given in the commentary that if somebody is made to run and his legs are tied with a gunny bag, then there is a speed limit. He can't run fast if the legs are not free. So he says the Lord reveals itself in these different forms. These revelations are partial, and if you think that these wonderful manifestations, it's like trying to imagine a person trying to win a race, run a race with legs tied by ropes or gunny bags. There is a race where both the legs are tied and then you have to hop, and there is a race in India, at least they run. It's a obstacle race where your legs, both the legs are tied with a gunny bag with the rope. You put your legs inside, then you can just jump with both the legs together, and then they test your skill, how fast. But that is like asking an athlete to run with that. So though the Lord reveals his different forms, these revelations are partial. All the manifestations that we see or that we perceive with the human mind are limitations. The waves are mere insignificant aspects of the ocean. Even so, the infinite phenomenal expressions of Ishvara are just a negligible speck in his magnitude. So, even the greatest of creations, when this itself is unfathomable, means we can't fathom the extent of the universe. So, only a few things which we see around us, stars, planets, galaxies, they themselves, our head reels when we can't try to fathom. Or even within the atom, if we go deep enough, we'll find a whole universe inside, the macrocosm and the microcosm. When even a simple thing as the universe, created universe, confuses us, it appears to be unfathomable. We can't fathom the greatness or the extent of that. Then what about the unmanifest? Means that which has not manifest. Manifested universe is always considered in Vedanta philosophy to be inferior to the unmanifest. It is known as avyakta. That which is manifest is known as vyakta. So what we see or what we deal with, what our whole life is the vyakta universe, and behind that is the avyakta universe. So Sri Ramakrishna so beautifully in the gospel says, and in fact this was the first conversation, serious conversation the recorder of the gospel had with Sri Ramakrishna. He asked him, because he was a Brahmo, Brahmos believed in a formless God, but they had a very peculiar idea. They said God is formless, he doesn't have a form, but he has qualities like love, compassion. So Sri Ramakrishna sometimes used to make fun. How can a formless existence have love? Love can be felt, love and compassion can be understood in terms of a human frame, human body. A human being can have love, compassion, or a created being can have love and compassion. But if you say he is not created, he is just a formless and still he is compassionate. It's a contradiction in terms, but anyway, they believed. So it was a kind of belief which was God is formless. But Sri Ramakrishna was very wise when he said, what aspect of God do you like? He said, I like the Advaitic aspect or the formless aspect. And Advaita is not only formless, he is nameless, he is without name, he is without form, and without attributes also. That is still difficult to understand. At least the theistic religion say he has attributes, he has these attributes, and according to our level, we will understand it and follow it. But if God is without form, then how can he be with form? This is a very eternal question which perplexes many people. Sri Ramakrishna reconciles that. When M came there, the master Mahendranath Gupta, who used the pseudonym M when he refers to himself, he said, when I first went to Sri Ramakrishna, I asked this question. Sri Ramakrishna asked me this question, whether you believe in God with form or without form. Then he was confused. He said, what kind of person this Sri Ramakrishna is? He's asking me whether God has a form or not. If he has form, then he cannot have both. He cannot be formless. And if he is formless, he cannot be with form. So this was a very difficult issue with him. And he said, what do I say now? Because he says, if you believe in God without form, may God bless you, you follow that. But don't think that people who say God is with form are wrong. That would be wrong, because what is true to you, your concept of formless may suit you, but the concept of God with form also is true as God without form. So God is with form, God is without form, and also transcending all this. This is another difficult thing to understand. He is transcendental. So all these vibhutis, even if you consider the formless aspect of God, the all-pervading aspect of God, as your way of expressing the divine, the supreme, even then, the other forms which somebody else accepts, if they are also true, but neither of you are fully true, the very idea of God can transcend all this. So you can't put a limitation to God. He alone knows who and what he is. So God alone, that is consciousness itself, when it is permeating through nature or when it is a support of the nature, that consciousness, bits of consciousness cannot analyze that pure consciousness itself. Because bits of consciousness, they are limited by time, space, and causation, as we'll see in the great idea of Advaita Vedanta, where Maya is described as that small part of that consciousness which people erroneously think is limited by space, time, and causation. The small universe of ours. It may be very big, but still compared to that infinite consciousness, it is small. So that is why the word Brahman, or which is used to explain the true nature of reality, it's an incomplete word, but still Brahman means the ever expanding. So it's like infinite expanse, not by way of volume, but in any aspect you stretch it beyond your imagination and you transcend it. That is Brahman. So that's why in that sense he says he alone knows who and what he is. He means he, or in some Vedantic texts they use it, because God cannot, if you moment you bring gender in God, to describe God, it is a error in itself, because God cannot be just male or female, then we are limiting him. So it is transcending. At the same time, he is with form. If you want, in and through the form, you can see the infinite, or you can consider him as formless. So this enables a vast majority or everybody to have his or her idea and way, a path towards the supreme reality. That is the greatness of Sri Ramakrishna. So we conclude with this, and if there are some questions you can ask, because I would not like to start the next chapter. I just gave you. So we end with, in this Upanishad of the Bhagavad Gita, iti Srimad Bhagavad Gita su Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Sri Krishna Arjuna Samvade Vibhuti Yogo Nama Dashamodhyaya. So why it is known as Upanishad? Because all the Upanishadic or Vedantic teachings have been compiled or have been put together as if somebody is threading a garland of different flowers. And the knowledge of Brahman, the supreme Brahma Vidya, means the knowledge of Brahman. To begin with, it is theoretical knowledge, but ultimately the ideas of the Gita or all the scriptures or the Upanishads, because this Gita itself is based, it's known as an Upanishads. Upanishatsu means belonging in the Upanishad, which is known as Bhagavad Gita. I mean, it is a collection of Upanishadic ideas, the knowledge of Brahman, the supreme, the science of yoga. So the whole yoga school is also brought. Yoga simply means a technique by which you bridge the gap between theory and practice. It's like science. There is a pure science, which is of not much consequence unless you use technology you use the principles of science to develop technology. And then you'll see, okay, this is Newton's law of gravity. On paper, it says this happens. But when you go to the laboratory, you apply those laws of science to some technical aspect of life, and you demonstrate in the laboratory, then it becomes a technique. So just as the relationship between science and technology, both are interdependent. Without pure science, you don't have technology. And without technology, you don't understand the importance of science. Otherwise, they'll simply remain as frozen ideas in a book. These ideas have to be used. Most of these laws which we discover have to be used. And when they are used, you will find it gives rise to technology. Similarly, spiritual ideas, when they are applied in our day-to-day life, they are known as yoga. Yoga is a technical term. Many people have fantastic ideas about yoga, that just by doing some asanas or improving one's health, and they are just two limbs of yoga, asanas and pranayama, some breathing exercises. No doubt they are steps, but yoga is a huge science. It's not only a science, it's a huge technology, you can say. The applications of the principles of Vedanta and Sankhya, when they are applied, they become yoga. So that is why every chapter is a particular yoga. This is known as Vibhuti Yoga. So the glories of the Lord are the means which can be used for contemplation, which itself is a yoga. So there can be hundreds of yogas. Any method that helps you to connect with the Supreme, whatever be the idea of Supreme Reality, whatever connects you is yoga. In the most general explanation that we can give. So the dialogue between Sri Krishna and Arjuna, this is the 10th discourse, Dashamodhyaya. So this is the 10th discourse or the 10th chapter, which explains one aspect of reality, which explains one path or yoga. So all the 18 chapters are the 18 yogas. And Sri Krishna is using Arjuna to explain to all of us. And sometimes Arjuna is asking questions, but in most of the cases, you will find Sri Krishna himself is anticipating that this doubt will come this doubt will trouble Arjuna. So he is asking the question himself. Many times he himself asks to clarify certain doubts. So the yoga of divine manifestations or Vibhuti Yoga, very clearly Sri Krishna tells him at the end, in the last two verses, that what I described in the first 40 verses is just a part of that glory. You use it, but before Arjuna can ask questions, Sri Krishna says, now you may ask. If that is only a part of the glory, why don't you explain the whole glory to me? So Sri Krishna, anticipating this question, says, no, there is a utility for that. At this stage of life, we can appreciate only little things, but as we grow in spirituality, higher and higher paths open up to us. And that is when you understand, try to understand higher and higher aspects of the glory, because each step is valuable. Just as we graduate from primary to high school and then we do our PhD, you can't simply skip any step on the way. It has to be undergone in a systematic way. So Krishna is telling Arjuna, this Vibhuti Yoga is one of the 10th chapter, the 10th yoga, is not only based on the Upanishads, not only describes the knowledge of Brahman, and also the supreme science of yoga, which is known as Vibhuti Yoga. And in these verses, I have tried to explain from one point of view how you can approach the Lord through Vibhuti. In fact, we began with the first chapter, which is the yoga of depression or Vishada. So Arjuna is confused because Sri Krishna says depression is also a yoga. I mean, it appears to be ridiculous, but there is great truth. Why this first chapter where all the faults or all the weaknesses of Arjuna are described? And in the second chapter, of course, they are addressed by Sankhya Yoga or the Jnana Yoga. But even the initial stage of it's not exactly depression, some kind of fear combined with some kind of ignorance. It's a combination of fear and ignorance which made Arjuna panic. Not exactly depressed, that would be a wrong word, but Vishada means some kind of hopelessness that he felt, some kind of weakness based on a wrong understanding of the principles of life. So that also, if that were not to be there, then Arjuna would not have asked these questions, and it would not have forced Krishna to act in such a way to give him the right knowledge. Because the strong person like Arjuna just dropped his Gandiva and said, I am not going to fight. Sri Krishna was forced to tell him that this is not proper, you have to fight, get up and fight. So after that, we see all the 10 chapters we have just seen. The 10th is Vibhuti Yoga, next is Vishwarupa Darshana. So we will see, this is not just some cock and bull story which is being described here. Though many people would like to they will be content to just hear these glories without even knowing the inner significance. But Sri Krishna will not allow us to do that. He says, just understand why I am describing my vibhutis, which is a partial manifestation of my actual glory, and what is the purpose of doing it. So in the Vibhuti Yoga, in the Vishwarup Darshana Yoga, where Arjuna now asks him, you spoke about this wonderful, glorious powers which we see in nature around us, but show me your real vibhuti. So some of the glories as an incarnation or as a manifestation of the Supreme. Maybe it is a limited manifestation. All manifestations are limited, as he clearly points out here. But still, what is your vibhuti? I want to perceive it with my own eyes, just by describing it. So we will come to the Vishwarup Darshana next time. So we'll conclude. Unless there is a question, there are 2 questions. Just let me. Yeah. Love is God and God is love with or without form adds a complication. God is daya, compassion. No, but as I told you, how can somebody which does not have a form have compassion? See, compassion, the moment you say compassion, it implies that God has to have a form, at least a form which is compassionate. How do you understand God's compassion? Of course, people who believe in the formless also feel his compassion if they have tuned their divine will to that of the Lord. Such people are not disturbed by anything. They, in everything they say compassion, because they feel that if everything is the Lord, their ideas are so clear, then whatever happens to us, it's just something good may happen in my life, something may happen this way or that way, it should not affect me. That way they feel the compassion. So no form is required. If you just see it, the God is Brahman or the formless aspect, and I have to just lead my life in such a way. The second chapter, in fact, Sri Krishna is describing this Sthita Prajna, one whose consciousness is so steady that no matter what happens, everything is a result of that compassion. In that sense, I think loving God as a personal God has known as bhakti, whereas without form uh, it adds a complication that God is compassion. It's a complication definitely, because you can't explain compassion without bringing in a human personality. Only a personality can be compassionate towards other. That's why most of the theistic religions, they say God has a form. God, most of the, not theistic, most of the people who believe in incarnation, they said our God is kind, He's kind, all the problems He solves, He's kind. But sometimes when bad things happen, we don't think He is kind. There is a problem there also. Don't think if God has a form, it's in, because if God has a form, then why does He not bring misery to us? That is another question which formless people who believe in formless God will ask. If God is so compassionate, if He's a form, if He can save everybody, if He can do wonders and miracles, then why is He not saving me? So God with form, just belief in God with form, we may get a faint idea of what God's love is, but true love is something very difficult to understand. So anyway, so I'll conclude. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.